The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below. Hey there, this is your orchestration tutor, Thomas Goss, welcoming you to the 12th and final compilation of website entries, website subscriber entries, for the 2022 Orchestration Challenge. Just 4 scores, as I mentioned before in the last 2 videos. I reorganized things so that 14 videos would be reviewed over the course of 3 videos rather than 2, so that just wouldn't result in 2 really big long videos. We're going to start with Julian's score here, and I really love the way that this starts. It reminds me of the beginning of the theme music to The Crown. I'm sure a lot of other people caught that. Almost like a reference. Maybe it wasn't intended as a reference, but of course, just rearranging the order in which all the pitches are played. Just ends up having that result. Pardon my slightly congested throat here. But yeah, just a lovely idea, and of course, like. If you really want to get it to sound like The Crown, you tell the bassoon player to play non-vibrato, right? So everything is just really, very still and calm with a slightly cool sound. So yeah, that all works fine. Okay, it's great. One might say, well, could you perhaps have the first horn player, or have this horn player play like maybe a little extra soft? But I don't think you need to do that with this particular configuration. However, excuse me, just really congested all of a sudden. However, I do have one little problem, and that is, I think that this should be the first horn, really, not the third horn or fourth horn. Should be first horn, and don't worry about starting with the first horn and then continuing on and so on. It's all good. And I can see the logic in going to the third and fourth horn, right, after that, because it really is better for them to work in pairs here. The third and fourth, rather than like first, then third in the middle, and then second on the bottom. But I feel that this could easily be played. At least this could be played by the first. But I would actually almost prefer that this were just first and then second when you have two voices, and then it just transfers over to the third and fourth, with the first continuing on. Now, you have sent me a problem here, Julian, because you have not told me who is playing what, right? You have 3 trumpets in C. Which trumpet player is this? Who's this? Is this the third or the fourth horn player? Is this the first or the second? Which clarinet player is this? Which bassoonist is that? So I'm just going to go on the assumption that single lines mean the first player. Okay? But really, seriously, all we need is this. Right? That's what is needed here, is to tell us which one, right? And if you had intended this, say, to be the fourth player, well, then you just type a 4 with a period after it, right? And that takes care of that. Then, when 2 voices come in, and there are only 2 horns allocated per staff, you don't have to say +3 or something. We know that when there are only, if there's 2 instruments per staff, like 2 clarinets, we know that the second one is going to be involved. Now, here, you've laid a little bit of a trap for yourself, because are you just going to have your second clarinet player play a single pitch, and then the rest of it is just going to be going back to the first? Well, it seems a little bit of a waste. What if this line here were played by the second, and then this were played by the first coming in on top, right? Same thing here with the oboes. Like, what if this were the second oboe, and then the first oboe came on top? So how you would manage that is, I'm just selecting all of them individually. Do something like this. Hang on. Let's change that to a half rest. Right? So something like this. You've got some other problems in here too, and hopefully I won't have to say this too many more times. You have you have imported the piano-style slurs into your score. Now, did you watch my video on pitfalls? Not my video on pitfalls, my common scoring errors video, where I talked about how you shouldn't just drop the piano style slurs onto a wind or string part. Well, here in this case, you see, by putting a slur over this, you take away the definition, the precision of this dotted rhythm here, right? So instead of da da ta 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 ta, you have ta da. Like you don't have that same precision as if they were separately articulated notes, right? You could completely get rid of the slur. You could slur from the beginning. Right? You could slur like this. But don't just do this, all right? I'll return it back to the state that it was. But please, think about that, right? So it was almost a trap built right into the piece that so many scores, so many entries did this, right? And you seem like a much smarter orchestrator than that. Then here, this is an artifact left over from the piano score. There's certainly no need for it. Why do we need 2 dotted half notes tied together when you could just easily do this? Dotted whole note tied to the next. See, this is all that's needed. The reason why there were 2 dotted half notes tied together is because Barvinsky wanted you to know the context of the middle bar as you were holding on to it with one of your fingers and then playing the rest of the notes in between, right? So just really wanted to show you where the half bar was as he tied it, right? But if, unless you're doing this, unless you really want to show, like the minuendo started here and not here, and it really had to start right on the fourth beat of the bar, then you have absolutely no need for to this tie in here, right? It just really isn't needed at all. So try not to do that. All right. So now let's go back to just analyzing the orchestration. So now English horn picks up, and you probably noticed something here is that I increased the size of the staves, and I also transposed your score back. Put it back into transposition. This is just easier for me to read and comprehend rather than scores in C where you've got like bass clef in your horn part where it doesn't need it and so on. So that's all fine. And then we have the oboes picking up from the same notes, or is this just one single oboe? I can't tell. But, you didn't tell me if this is just first oboe, maybe? Oops. Yep. So, let's assume that's first oboe. And that this is just one bassoon player. So far, this is all working fine, right? Yeah, and you are solving one of the problems that is in this, that are in one of the problems in my evaluation criteria, which is, the pitch weight being in the upper middle register of the piano. So you've really given us a generous low end here. And you have prevented the piece from, modulating to E, or not modulating, but ending up in E minor in the second bar, right? But it really is, a G6 chord. Yeah, and this is just really lovely and pleasant right in here. Now, the only possible concern here is that you just keep adding on more and more, more and more texture. Right, so does it need to be this heavy? Like, I mean, I'm really I'm fascinated with the progression of texture as things sort of get more and more intense. But just like the weight, finally, when you have all of these instruments here at the end, I'm just wondering if that much weight is necessary. I mean, certainly is a fascinating experiment, but yeah. Yeah, and which trombonist is this? Is this the first player? And same thing with the trumpet. Is this the first trumpet player? So, the thing about it is, first trumpet and first trombone playing in octaves here, even softly, is going to be a very definite sound. It's going to be a very clear sound. And, it will just cut through everything else that's happening there. I mean, you have, who's playing this pitch is the oboe, right? So what chance does the oboe have in this texture? And what's more, what's your destination with these crescendos? How loud are these players going to get? Are they going to be louder than the brass players? Shouldn't we know how loud that will be? And will the horn players end up being louder than the other brass players? Crescendo to what, right? So is it crescendo to mezzo forte? Maybe mezzo forte for all of the winds, and maybe just mezzo piano for the for your horns here. And then diminuendo to what, right? How soft is everybody going to get here? We need to know, right? To diminuendo to pianissimo, right? Well, that information is extremely important. Here, let me get rid of this. All right. Yeah, and right in here, I feel that this needs to be, it just feels like it's a little, it kind of starts and stops, and it, like, nothing really much is going on with it. Like, I don't see, there's no surge or, like, swell of emotion here. It's just kind of do-dee-dee-dee-dee, and then the English horn comes in to help out. So I just feel like maybe there could have been some sort of nuance here, or some maybe crescendo hairpins, or some other kind of thing to sort of bring it out, make it sing a little, right? It just feels a little understated the way that it is. Yeah. And then, here, like, this is completely unnecessary, because if you have tuba holding this long C, this long C here is all of the sustain that this timpani note is ever going to get, right? So if this were just a quarter note value, then it would have exactly the same effect as if the player were to hit it and then not damp it, right? So it's better just to have a quarter note stroke, and then let the let your tuba do the sustaining, and then the same thing here, right? This G, and let the tuba do the sustaining as well, right? And then same thing here. Then this is a bit irregular, right? Shouldn't this have a fermata on it, this rest here, and shouldn't these rests have fermatas on them? So it's a little inconsistent, the way that the scoring is. So, I would just say, like, in terms of the orchestration, maybe like just making it bigger and adding more and adding more and adding more. I mean, it's an interesting approach, but, like, how effective is that? How much of a color difference do you get just by adding weight, right? And do some of these decisions end up kind of overwhelming others? Like, the beautiful brass right in here. It's so clear and so, so nicely worked out that it will just basically overwhelm these other things happening in here, the clarinets and so on. The English horn, all of these parts will just get swallowed up by by this beautiful, clear, even warmer sound and more aggressive sound of the brass, even played softly, right? But I mean, you can leave everything in because you get a wonderful combination of sound, but it's still, still has the risk of being a lot of, just more work than it's worth for, you just have to make the decision of how much is worth it. All right. All right, so now going on, we have a similar situation here, like a similar strategy. And it starts out really nicely, but then, like, we're seeing just adding more and more voices to the figuration, right? So the danger here is that, like, with this strategy is that, while you are adding some notes in some parts that have a melodic function, they're not necessarily of the kind that, like, adds the right kind of weight to make the to match what is going on. This kind of bigger this kind of bigger development and expansion of the texture in all of the winds, right? Because this will, I mean, you can make everybody pianissimo if you like, but it still has a lot of weight to it. And there's also the concern here that, like, how effective could the harp possibly be? Here you're sort of taking pains to, like, have mezzo forte here in the harp and so on. But, like, it will mezzo forte here in the harp playing this, against the lower strings. I mean, that will all work. You'll hear some harp in there. But then the more we add with bass clarinet, bassoon, contrabassoon, and so on, and then having the added weight of the horn in there and trombone, pretty much after a while, we cannot really hear the harp anymore. And you can actually hear this in the mock-up too. The harp becomes less and less distinct the more weight you put on things. You also have poco a poco crescendo, right? To what, right? To mezzo forte here. And then here you just say piano mezzo forte. So you left out a poco crescendo here. Yeah. So I mean, how many people share in this? Is it just the melody that gets louder? All right. Well, let's look at how some of this is put together. Okay. So divisi violins. That's great. You marked that, and you can just say div period. Right. It's perfectly fine to just have, Right, this is sufficient. You don't have to write out the full word. So we've got this beautiful transcription, octaves, and once again, what is happening here is you have dropped the piano style slurs onto the string parts. So you're essentially asking your string players to just bow this long, 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 long slur, and then go up bow, and then once again, so it's like really down, all under one bow. Up, down. Now, I mean, it's a soft dynamic, so it's doable, but, wouldn't this work better? Down, up, down, up, and the same thing here. Down, up, down, right? Wouldn't that work better? And then here, instead of going slur, down, up, down, up, down, and then in these parts here, like, doesn't this work better as slur, slur, right? Down, up, down, right? Up, down. Isn't that better? And then, like, same thing here. Like, of course the horn player can play all of this. They don't have to worry about bowing. But do you really not want? I mean, you're serious? You don't want an articulated note here? You want da, da. You don't want da, ta, ta, ta. Right? I mean, really think about the real consequences of just putting a slur on something. Right? These are the slurs. These are the slurs from the piano part, and they're all good for horn and winds and so on. They're all fine, but I mean, you really just want no downbeat articulation. If you're gonna have downbeat articulation in one part, you should have it in the other parts, just so that they match nicely. Now, it doesn't matter for celesta. Celesta is a keyboard instrument, so that's sort of expected, right? Okay. Now, these are nice long slurs here in the viola and cello, and probably they could also be like maybe half bar. Like you could go, do you know what I mean? Like that's probably better. Like down, up, and then the same thing. You could split this up into down and up, and then like making your string players bows match just also leads to a much smoother sound, right? Anyway, so this is just a few ideas. Like, we cannot orchestrate automatically. We have to think about all of the little features, all of the little nuances, all the little things that make it work. So one last thing I'll comment on here is, I really love the idea of the violins, the second violins and the horns sort of playing like they're playing their accompaniment harmony kind of stacked together like this. That's a really cool idea. But like as we go forward, I don't feel like the celesta and then the trombone an octave lower, right, than the lower divisi first violins. I don't think that is enough, really, to carry this melody forward in the face of this growing mass of instruments that are playing the accompaniment figure, right? So probably what's going to happen is that by right around here, the accompaniment is going to get so massive, even with everybody playing pianissimo, that really the attention will be on this, and it really will not be on the melody that much, right? So considering the fact that you have so many like single lines here, you could easily have this part and this part in your oboe and flute being played by the second player. And then you could double these lines here with the first, like the top line could be first flute and this bottom line could be first oboe, right? Or second oboe, if you want to divide it that way. So I think you're missing an opportunity by just scoring single lines and then just throwing in an extra an extra harmony note here and there wherever you feel like it. Like for instance in here, like where you just have, it's all basically just first clarinet and then just kind of throwing in a harmony occasionally, right? So you really have to think that you have two players playing, and they each want, they each need a part that they can dig their teeth into. They cannot just play a one little boop or beep every once in a while just because it's convenient to you, right? You have to think about what makes them sound good because that makes your score sound good, right? Rather than just kind of, just using whatever note, here or there that might be convenient, right? But all that stuff aside, it's a very cool approach, and I actually kind of like the idea of stacking more and more weight onto certain parts. It's certainly something I haven't seen done to this extreme. But like you absolutely have to bulk up your melody. The more you bulk up your accompaniment, the more you have to bulk up your melody. You got these trumpets doing nothing, right? I think you're going to need more weight on the melody here. So just think about those things. And actually, as like the place for the celesta is here, right? This right in here, it's going to get almost completely drowned out by just the growing mass of winds, and especially once you throw in the piccolo right in here, even softly, it's going to interfere with the ability of the audience to hear the celesta with clarity, right? So, so just watch out. Celesta is like one of the most delicate instruments of all of them. Okay, well, very, very cool score. All four of these scores have unique qualities and real interest, and really I think will hold anybody's interest all the way to the very, very end of all of these website subscriber evaluations. So please join me as we take a look at the next score. What an interesting bunch of approaches all stuck together, Jorgios. It's such a cool score. The problem that I see is not so much that any one particular approach does or doesn't work all that well. It's more that they're not really connected in a way that is really cohesive. Do you know what I mean? Like they stand on their own, and some elements in some approaches stand on their own really well. But like connecting them all together is the big trick, isn't it? So let's take a careful look at this from the beginning, shall we? All right, so here you put the melody into the harp at mezzo forte. You want the harp to stand out in the foreground, and you also have some celesta in here too. Okay, so we sort of run into our first problem here, and that is that the sound of the celesta doesn't really connect with what's going on with the harp. So here you have this bryum, and I guess you're missing another roll mark here. Bryum, and then you go pling, e, right? And there's like no chord or anything in the harp to really kind of help what's going on in the harp come to a conclusion. And the celesta, since it doesn't have, like, it's just coming in cold from nowhere, it doesn't really connect with what the harp is doing. So we don't really hear the celesta note as being part of the melody, right? So it's like, it's not enough to just assign different elements, different functions to different parts. The function, like the the purpose of the function, should be really, really clear to the listener, I feel, and especially in like tonal music like this, right? This sort of kind of pre-impressionistic era sort of music, which is kind of interesting that like Barvinsky really could have gone in an impressionistic direction. He could have been the impressionist of, of Ukraine. But instead he sort of kind of went along a way that was more modeled by, say Rachmaninoff and so on. Like, his models were more like late Romantic, post-Romantic, Eastern European, rather than being all that impressionistic. And Impressionism, like, in 1908 in Eastern Europe, there were probably a lot of scores that Barvinsky did not have access to. Like maybe the latest by Ravel, say like Gaspard de la Nuit and so on. That may not have been published until after it was scored or after it was written in 1908. But anyhow, he had a beautiful ear for it. So I think we need to respect that and like see like what kinds of things can we do to strengthen it. So for instance, if the celesta had been playing along with the harp, right, then I think that this would not sound so like out of nowhere. I mean, and it isn't helped by the fact that the sound set here is a bit it's a bit on the blunt side, right? Maybe try out Note Performer, see if that would work a little bit better. All right. So, I think it's really cool how you're going here from this sort of these pizzicato octaves to these like kind of sighing fourths, or excuse me, sighing sixths, I should say sixths and fifths. Kind of sort of alternating in arco is a cool idea. All right, and here we have harp rushing upwards. Now, if you have a situation like this where there is a where you are doing a cross staff kind of a line, and you mark the B sharp here, then you have to mark the B sharp here as well, right? Because it's in a new region. It would be possible that your harpist might think, oh, you forgot to put in a B natural here, right? So, or maybe you did intend a B natural there, but you didn't put it in, and you weren't asked to because of the way your notation application works. I don't know, but seeing as how you have a B natural in your other parts, right? Anyhow, to continue onwards. So, let's think about that melody. Bum, 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 right? And then here, the oboe picks up the melody, bum, bum. And I felt that this was incredibly short. Like the way that it just ended after 2 beats. When in the original score, it lasts till just before the very last beat of the bar, right? So, I mean, why did it need to be so short? It's like making it so short is almost underlining the kind of chopped up nature of the different approaches all being forced together and not smoothly connected, right? So I don't think you're doing any favors by having this short. I mean, especially when you consider, like, how beautiful is the oboe playing on that A, simple A, right? The A that tunes the whole orchestra. Well, the reason why it's used to tune the orchestra is not just because it's secure, but it's also a really beautiful note that, it's just right in the sweet spot of the oboe. Bum, bum. Isn't that better than bum, bum? Do you hear what I mean? Okay. Then here, the problem is that the pizzicato doesn't really have very much tone weight. So for it to be able to push into this like in a way that sets up your brass just doesn't really, it doesn't really follow, right? So here's where we get one of the, another instance of things not following. I think this is almost maybe the most abrupt change right in here. Like you want you want things to build towards the brass coming in, but there isn't any beef here. There isn't any muscle kind of going, hey, here come the brass. It's just, you're just going pluck, 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 and all of a sudden, bum, bum. Because it doesn't matter how loudly this pizzicato plucks. Pizzicato is a softer sound. So unless you were to really push your violins up to like fortissimo or something like that, they wouldn't really set up the brass very well. And even at that, the sort of the bulk of the tone wouldn't be a good introduction, right? It's just a sudden burst of this brass sound right in here. All right. I mean, and with that said, like let's look at the scoring here of the horns and of the other brass. So you've got a huge amount of weight. This is another thing to really watch out for. You've got just a massive ton of weight here. You have A2, A2A trumpets on this F. Ba 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 bum bum, right? And it's like, do you need two trumpets here? Then here we've got, just basically our trombones kind of playing thirds below and so on. And here we have like the viola sort of taking part of that, that extended G, and then the extended, which comes in a little early, then the extended C, right? But in order for this function here to make any sense, it has to be strong below or at the same pitch as the lowest trombone, right? So this would be more of a job for, rather than violas, which are so soft and so easily buried in brass texture. The function of this line would be much more would be much more well represented by, say, bass trombone, like holding the G to the middle of the bar and then holding the C while the trombones leapt upwards, right? All right. But what worries me the most is the horns. All right. I'm just going to flick ahead a little bit. Yeah. Okay. So I'm seeing absolutely nothing in your horn scoring that justifies this arrangement here. Horns 1 and 2 above, and horns, 1 and 3 above, and 2 and 4 below. You just don't, like the reason for having horns 1 and 3 as your top staff is that the expectation that those horns are going to be playing a lot together up high, and it just saves time and it saves space to put them up there. And the same thing goes for horns 2 and 4, that they'll do a lot of low work together. However, in your very first introduction, they're all playing a unison, right? And then here you're saying, A2, A2. Yeah, and I mean, and that just is dovetailing to the first horn. So, I mean, that this could easily be scored just as it normally should be, with the second horn on this staff and the fourth horn on this staff, and the first coming in and dovetailing with the second, and that would be much, much clearer, actually, right? And then here, you're saying, okay, well, this is easier to score in two separate, on two separate staves, just barely. There's no reason why this could not be scored in the regular way, with both of these staves having the same parts on them. Just with the low horn and the high horn separated the way that they normally are. Don't think that just because you run into the occasional bar like this, that it means that you have to change the entire order of how the horns are scored, right? Because the problem is, like, the huge risk here, Jorgios, is that you are going to fall into bad habits. I've got go to the orchestrationonline.com website, read the tips on horns, okay? I've already talked about this enough. I don't want to use up half of your evaluation. All right, so but that's not the biggest concern here. More to the point, right? You are putting just a mass of weight on the melody note an octave below these trumpets, right? Bum 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 bum. So it is just so heavy. I would recommend one trumpet, and I would recommend two horns, and I would actually recommend the first and second horn play this together, and just give the third and fourth horn a rest. Now, yes, it is. I mean, it sort of is a lower line, but there is no reason why first and second shouldn't be able to form a bond on that, and you just get the best result starting off at the beginning of the piece. Yeah, it's just way too much weight, and especially considering how, like, you start so gently and so delicately, and all of a sudden you have this boom just right in the middle of it, right? So it doesn't, and you might say, well, I want a surprise, I want to shock the system, except for the fact that you are leading into it with these other elements, right? So obviously you do intend some kind of lead-in. Well, the lead-in isn't strong enough, and especially when you have harp playing across the same middle register as this brass right in here, right? So what happens is the brass will also kind of kill what's going on in the harp. Now, if you had a nice glissando that went from, say, this A all the way up to 2 octaves above this A, and you wouldn't have to write it out, just have a straight line and just have your tuning all set up in a diagram. And you don't need to write out the separate notes. Then you would definitely hear the harp, right? But I think just something to back it up, to push into where the appearance of these horns and heavy brass, I think, is really called for. And then, see, here's the next problem. Da 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 da. You don't finish it, right? There's no finishing to the phrase in the trumpets, right? You're just going da 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 da. Strings at mezzo forte. So the strings at mezzo forte with the harps and so on aren't going to be a little softer than the brass. They're going to be much softer. So it'll just be like falling off a cliff. Now, maybe that's also what you want. Okay, well, I cannot argue with that, but I can just tell you what I feel as a listener is just that the abruptness of it sort of makes it difficult for me to follow what's going on in the melody. This is very cool, though. I like the little flute twittering on top. Now here is where I felt your scoring got to be stronger. I mean, there's still some issues here, but I like the fact that you stick with a certain approach for a longer time, right? So bassoons, bum 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 bum, and then like this little bit of counterpoint right in here, working inside the clarinets. Now, I would say, like, if you're going to score, though, if you're going to have this enclosed voice, this enclosure between the clarinets and the bassoons, I see the whole logic. You're saying, oh, well, I want the strings to be soft while these, in this to be bright. But you're not really doing any favors to the overall plan. They should all be mezzo forte, dolce, right? I think you just get a much, much better sound, and especially from your flute, who is going to basically disappear, right? I mean, it's a neat idea, but like the flute is so much weaker in its middle register than the clarinet is in its clarino register. Especially if you're going here, you're saying 2. This doesn't make any sense to me. First clarinet, and then you're changing the stem direction, and so you're thinking that the stem direction means that this is now second, right? That's not how it works. You shouldn't do this, reversing the positions of these instruments. What you would need in here is a second voice rest underneath to really clarify who's doing what part. And if this is going to be the second, then you need first voice rests above to tell us who's doing what when. Okay? And the clarinetists don't need any of this fancy footwork of swapping what their roles are. It's really the second's job to listen to the first playing higher, and rarely do they swap positions. Yeah, you might be thinking, well, I want the second clarinetist to have a lot of fun up there. Usually, the first doesn't do the supporting role, so I thought I would swap them. Except for, what if this piece is played by like a community orchestra or a student orchestra? What if the second clarinetist can barely justify their existence being in that orchestra, but the first is actually their teacher, right? You might force them to swap parts, which is just more hassle, right? So don't do things like that. Just leave everybody in their proper order. Okay. Yeah, and then once you have more of this sort of middle voice flute going on here, and it's just very hard. It's very difficult to for that to compete, to have a meaningful role right in here. I mean, this could be played by the bass clarinet, and you get a much clearer sound, and it would still sound flute-like, right? But all the same, all that aside, I felt that this was like one of the more cohesive parts, and I'm a little hesitant of you bringing in the timpani right here, because you've already got a bass line established, G, F sharp, E, right? So when you throw in the timpani here, you are interfering with this function, all right? So really think about the function of each part before you interrupt the flow of how things work. Now, I'm not saying that Barvinsky at 18 years old was an eternal genius of all time, and we shouldn't mess with his stuff because he knew what he was doing because he was a genius. I'm not using that circular logic. I think Barvinsky was a really gifted, talented person, and I think at 18 he was, he definitely was a prodigy. But he had reasons for doing the things the way that he did, right? So, like, if we work against his reasoning, we should really back it up with some very keen justifications. And I felt that this is not quite justified if you have, just with the motion of the bass right in here. All right. And then the way this finishes on flute, I mean, that's beautiful. With everybody dying down to pianissimo, this has got more of a chance, especially without the clarinets there. So here's a place where I think you could throw in soft lower flute. However, earlier I just think it doesn't really contribute very much. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing about this that couldn't be played by a different instrument, right? I mean, oboe would be an obvious choice, but if you really want that fluty kind of very background kind of a sound, then I would just say go for soft bass clarinet. Bass clarinet can play fairly high in its register and still sound very soft and sweet. Okay? It's a really good substitute for when people feel that that they want a low flute in a section that is a little bit more busy and more kind of timbrally cluttered in a way that would wipe out most lower flute scoring. Now, the second half works a little bit better, but one thing that I will say about it is that, I mean, in a lot of ways, it's very randomized. So you really run the risk of certain parts falling out, of players coming in early or late on the first run through and rehearsal. This kind of scoring is a big challenge, I would say, for a conductor, especially a conductor conducting, say, a community orchestra or even a semi-pro orchestra. Because it's not just getting everybody to come in on time when you have a situation like this, where you're going note, note, note kind of stuff. where one starts after the other and after the other and so on, and then just little bits and pieces coming and going. It's not just that. It is also the balance of elements, right? Now I am seeing a mass of different dynamic markings. That does not mean that these different markings could not all work if a lot of time were spent trying to finesse them. But I mean, imagine the conductor conducting this rehearsal and not only trying to cue each player, like it's just like one cue after another of all these different players all over the place. It's that, and it's also like saying to one player, listen, the person sitting next to you, hey, bassoonists, the bass clarinet player has a fortissimo mark. Don't play louder there. That's, they're not having, it's not a mistake, right? Having to say that so many times. Having so many players sitting next to each other, looking at each other's parts and saying, like, what do you have here? What's your marking? Because, like, it seems like you're playing really, really loud, for mezzo piano, right? Oh, I see. You have fortissimo, and oh, I see. Huh. Do you see? Like, it's just it's not that these things do not work, and that they should never be tried. It's more that if you use the natural strengths of the orchestra, then you don't have to do all that stuff. You don't have to do more than just a little bit of dynamic mixing. Okay? And certain things like don't even matter, right? If you have pizzicato here in your double basses at mezzo forte and they're hitting this low E, then it doesn't matter that you have marked this harp part here. The harp, and also you've got this timpani stroke here, which you want this to be sostenuto, right? So who's going to hear this harp? Right? How is anybody going to hear that? And here, if you are pushing vigorously towards the next bar, and you have all of this other motion happening, this little waltz right in here, then how is this celesta going to come through? And also remember, celesta is a very soft instrument. You could write forte for celesta, and it will sound mezzo piano for the rest of the orchestra. You could write fortissimo, and it will still sound mezzo piano for the rest of the orchestra. Right? It is not, the celesta is not about sheer volume. It's not about making a point that is that has a lot of muscle behind it. All right. So but all that aside, look, I think you need to get a little bit more experience scoring two voice writing. Looking at this, I mean, you want two bassoons here, right? So then you want the second bassoon. It's like here you have a tie scored here for your first. Like, wouldn't you need a slur going down to the second voice in the second bassoon? I would go to two voices at this point. And then here, also, you should have like a second voice rest below here, and then these should be scored in separate voices, and then you can come together and you can unify the voices here. I would make this slur last at least until the next bar, if not all the way to the end of the tie. And I would, this should also be in two separate voices. Actually, thinking about like the change of position, you've got the tie here and the slur below, right? I would just make that in two separate voices, just to be simple. And this could be in single voice, intervals. Yeah, just you need a little bit more experience with that. Study some scores, see how other people score passages like this, okay? All right. Now, I am not going to get on your case about the whole, this whole thing about how the left-hand pattern needs to connect to the middle voice, because you've done something here. You've used the raw material from the piano score and reinterpreted it in this really cool folk way, right? Watch out about why I don't know why some of your stem directions are very strange. Like why are the stems down right here and the slur up? Is there something about the way that you copy paste things from one part to the next where the stems stay in the same direction? Just think about trying to fix little bits like that, little details. But this is really lovely right in here. You know, I love bass clarinet solos. This one works great, and then the way it sort of hands off to the clarinet. Of course, this would be an octave higher, right? Yeah. And then okay, so this stuff the horn player can do all day long. Bum 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 bum. Right? They can play octaves, especially like this sort of middle register stuff. It's fine, but like don't expect this beautiful, elegant. If you were intending this to sort of replace the flow of the left hand of the piano, like to have more, like if you say, oh, is there any way that the horns can play more gracefully at bar 13, please? I want it to sound like that shimmering left hand, and they'll sort of look at you like, what? That's not the hornist's job, right? That would be more like a cellist's job. So if you had intended this function here to be really smooth and beautiful and so on, that's not really a horn thing. I mean, yeah, horns can play smooth and beautifully, but like in this kind of broken octave kind of a thing, right? You get more of like a blah. There's a, if you connect it with a slur, and then if you have them separated notes, they're going to be, they are going to be separated notes in two different registers of the horn. All right, and then here you have like fortissimo in your bass clarinet, and fortissimo in your violas and cellos. Why? Why can't they be mezzo forte crescendo? Yeah, so it's just there's so much dynamic mixing here, with everybody just kind of playing a slightly different dynamic, mezzo piano with your horns, and then piano with your trumpets, and trust the players, right? I often recommend that people maybe mark down the horns when everybody is playing really close to each other, and really playing right on top of each other, the way that you have this scored. You have really low scored strings and very low flute, right? I mean, your flute is basically just going to get swallowed up by the oboe from this point onwards, and like not to mention the proximity of the horns here, and then when you're throwing in the trumpet, first trumpet, I don't care if you mark this piano or not, that flute is gone. Right? It's not serving any purpose. Its function has been obliterated by everybody else. So yes, I do sometimes recommend that the brass should be a little softer than the winds and strings when you're really scoring them right on top of each other and you want to blend. However, I don't recommend this kind of thing. Mezzo piano, fortissimo. Forte left over from previous, mezzo piano in the strings. It is just a minefield for the conductor and for the players, right? Just imagine how much rehearsal time you're going to lose by people getting lost, by the conductor desperately trying to cue everybody, and by people comparing like what dynamic everybody's got on their parts, on each other's parts. Okay, and then you set up things. You set up these beautiful solos. In the beginning of the solo, why is the dynamic here and not here? Isn't this the important place? This solo is starting over forte horns, mezzo forte heavy brass, forte bassoons, bass clarinet, tremolo in the violins. I don't care what your mock-up is telling you. This flute part needs more. It needs more space. It needs to at least be marked forte at the beginning, right? Okay, and then this trade-off is kind of nice. But I feel if you want this to be a beautiful flowing solo where the sun is shining and the birds are singing, then this stuff has to be way softer, right? Like I would say mezzo piano in your brass and mezzo forte in everybody else's part, and then you can have your flute at forte or mezzo forte, and then I think it'll come through fine. And then diminuendo to piano in all parts. Why aren't the strings? Now here you're saying tremolo, and then you say senza tremolo. So does your notation application not give you the option of having 3 beams? It's better to have the 3 tremolo beams on the stem of the note rather than it is to say tremolo. Because at a glance, if people are there's always a chance, right? If you have the triple beam tremolo, there's almost 0 chance that people will get mixed up. But when you write in the words tremolo, there is it's more like 5 to 10% in a hurry. That player who's just coming in at the last minute, and their wife had a baby yesterday, or they're studying for their real estate license, or they had a really bad day, or something else, and they didn't notice the words tremolo and they weren't expecting them, right? And then you have to write in senza tremolo everywhere, right? Just put in the triple beam if you can do it. Maybe you haven't figured out how to do that on your notation application yet, but figure it out, all right? And don't do the tremolo, senza tremolo kind of marking. Okay. So, and you throw in another big, massive, like here you're having triple F. Okay, so do you think that anybody will be able to hear anything else over the timpani playing triple F here? This will wipe out the lower strings. It'll wipe out the bassoons. To a certain extent, it could even wipe out the trombones if the player really plays triple F here. Perhaps you assigned these dynamics in order to get the right response from your notation application playback. I'm thinking, but there is no reason for your brass to be so strong. They could just be playing mezzo forte or forte. Right? What if everybody were playing forte here, and then everybody else were playing fortissimo? Then here's the other thing: is like here you're assigning a fortissimo to your horns. You forgot to mark the other horns, and fortissimo to your trombones. Why are your winds mezzo forte? Because they're unless they are marked, unless you do the opposite, nobody is going to hear these winds, right? I mean, it'll be hard enough to hear the lower strings. It would be better for your brass to be forte here, and for your winds and your strings to be fortissimo. All right, and don't go like all you need is forte accents on your timpani. You do not need triple F. And I know you want these jolts, right? I'm figuring it out now. But all the same, no, I'm seeing like a crescendo here, crescendo in these parts. Are you perhaps setting up a big flaring kind of a brass thing? Once again, there's not enough meat here in terms of the texture to justify this sudden flaring here, unless you do intend to shock, right? But if you intend to shock, you need to redo the dynamics as I've stated. And then here, like you're maintaining the fortissimo. And as you're maintaining this fortissimo, right, in all these parts, you have this bass clarinet, this little bass clarinet stuff here. Who will be able to hear this, right, with fortissimo horns playing on those sounding A's? All right, so just really, really be careful how you assign. If we're going to throw a bunch of different approaches together, I would say just really do some work on connecting those different approaches, and really do some work on thinking about the registers of the instruments, their strengths and their weaknesses. Like, this is almost completely wasted. The nobody will be able to hear this flute at all. Right? It's a throwaway. It won't do anything to firm up the texture. It won't do anything to harmonize with the first oboe. Right, so it would be better for this part right here to be a second oboe part, right, where the instrument is strong. So, anyways, there are a few other things. I mean, this is kind of cool here. This is more like wind writing right in here. It is possible to do, but like little trill like, da-dum bum bum. Those kinds of moments, they really need a lot of space to come through clearly, and putting a flute trill at the same time is just obscuring what the harp is doing in here, right? So anyway, so that's just, just really watch out about the proportions of different things. Now, having said all this, and just really critique the hell out of your score, I'm not saying that you should not continue to orchestrate. I think that this is a really promising start on this particular piece, and I almost kind of wonder how you will approach the next orchestration challenge, because I'm going to have two different options. I'll have the option of orchestrating in the composer's style, and I will also have the option of composing in a more modernistic experimental style. Okay, so you might choose the latter and do really amazing things, right? So all of these different approaches are they are possible, but I almost feel like each one of them would take about an hour to talk over with you. So if it's at all possible for you to work with somebody as a coach or as a teacher, I absolutely recommend it. There's some people on the Orchestration Online website. I am too busy to give anybody any personal coaching right now, though I do look at scores from time to time in Patreon. So just get a little bit more guidance, do some more score reading, look at pieces look at Prokofiev, look at Bartok, other composers who have this sort of just very they have moments in their pieces where there's just massive shocks and surprises and things, and just really look at how they contrasted the different sections when they had a shock or a surprise. Look at how they connected different sections that were very different from each other, but there was a beautiful flow of the melody and of the accompaniment. Okay? So that is your assignment, and I really, really hope that you will continue orchestrating and that you'll continue entering these challenges. Okay? Because there's a lot here, and I just really want to see you grow and to see what you'll come up with next year. Okay? So with that said, I'm going to say, in all complete honesty, good work. That you came up with so many different approaches, and you really, I could tell you really thought about a lot of different things and how to connect them and how to have fun with it and so on, and that's very admirable. All right, so please see me next year with the next challenge. All right, now on to our next score. Now a very cool score from Sasha Kindell. And Sasha, you've been following my channel for years, over a decade, I think, since it started. And you've weighed in with different perspectives and thoughts about things and possible corrections, and kind of kept me on my toes. And none of that is objectionable or has caused me any worry whatsoever. It's been great talking over different things with you and clarifying certain points for you and so on, and hearing what you have to say about things. And it's just, it's also great to get material from you in these challenges. It feels like part of an ongoing conversation. And I am just looking at your winds right here, and it's just really lovely. All these different colors that you've got in here: flute, English horn, no oboe, basset horn instead of a standard clarinet, and then bass clarinet, and then of course two bassoons and contrabassoon. That's all kosher. You know, basset horn is a little bit out of a lot of orchestra's availability. So if you really do go forward with this, and maybe you've already scored a full length version of this, but I would say see if you can supply an alternate part for like A clarinet or B flat clarinet, okay? Because there's nothing in this that is out of range. Your lowest note is an F sharp sounding B below middle C, right? So it's all within the range of a standard clarinet of either tuning. Okay, so all right, so let's talk about this lovely opening here, and I was sort of thinking about how it sort of twists my logic and my criteria a little bit. Like, I'm looking for treatments of the opening that represent an emotional and timbral progression, right? So you don't really do that too much, but you do make a few little subtle changes, and then you push things up to a forte, and like in pushing up to a forte, just even using the same treatment, the colors of the instruments change a little bit. And then you also do something with, changing registers and voice crossings and so on, like having the bassoons go so high, or the first bassoon go so high, and crossing, across the clarinet family and so on. So that's all very, very fun. And also, just the treatment of the parts, like the flute and the English horn in octaves here. That is also very, very cool. And having the lower winds and so on working together. There really is a lot of weight on the accompanying parts, and a lot less on the melodic part, right? So, I mean, you do come in with a bassoon right in here, and reaching up for that high C, which is going to be a little weaker than you think. All right, it'll be a nice clear note, but it's not going to necessarily have the same impact as the English horn on the same pitch, right? But still, it's a very cool idea that you've got in here. I mean, this is like worth the price of admission right here. You know what I mean? I'm not so keen on this. The way that you mixed the diminuendo around a little bit, so that these instruments here are fading out down to piano at the same time that these instruments are pushing, and then these instruments aren't doing anything. I'm not so keen on this. Just listen to it in the mock-up and tell me if you're satisfied with that. I feel, I feel it's just sort of a mix of, when you really want unity heading towards this final, the final sounding E's, there kind of is a bit of disunity leading up to it, which I don't think necessarily helps our feeling of kind of ending somewhere in a peaceful way. All right. But other than that, everything works great. I love the muted strings coming in here and sort of filling in some of these holes. That's really lovely. And you do it in a really nice, subtle way, so it isn't just it isn't quite so abrupt. I do not know if I would leave a rest here, though. I think I would have this. I think I would have a full half note here with maybe a diminuendo, and then coming back at whatever dynamic you want it to be, piano or whatever. And then the same thing here. Maybe extend these diminuendo marks to the end of a half note here, and then come back in piano. And I think that would make it a lot more seamless. But maybe you don't want seamless. Maybe you want things to feel more abrupt and less dovetailed and less connected. But anyways, yeah, just a great beginning, great use of basset horn. It was just, I feel as a neglected and misunderstood instrument. And, to make matters worse, there are some basset horns out there which are just really just unpleasant to play. And I know this for a fact because there is a certain very professional orchestra whom I have worked with and whose players I have worked with, who got a pair they got a pair of basset horns in order to play the Mozart Requiem and other little pieces of Mozart and other instances where basset horn might arise, and they're just so unfriendly and so much of a hassle to play. Just like nobody really wants to play them, and oftentimes, from what I understand, I may be wrong about this, but there's another chap who's got a basset horn or two who lends his out rather than people playing the other ones. So, anyway. That is perhaps the status. I'm not exactly sure of all the details there, but yeah, there are some basset horns out there that are just not that fun to play. And that is a shame because it should be an instrument that's fun and, that is just about the same amount of ease to play as a bass clarinet. There's a real similarity between their construction and fingering of the lower notes and so on. All right, so to continue on, to stop raving about the basset horn, which I think was just a very beautiful use right in here. We're continuing on with muted horns 1 and 2. And just kind of looking at the part, until you get to here, with the voices definitely doing different things. There's almost they're so united in their playing that middle voice part, those harmonic thirds. You almost don't need a separate staff. You know what I mean? They could all be just sharing the same stem, and it would work just fine. Interesting use of contrabassoon. Now, did you notice how easy it was to hear the contrabassoon with this kind of scoring? And part of that is because you're having it come in early, right? So it doesn't have a chance to really unite with the double bass right in here, and you also cut off early, so the double bass sound doesn't maintain any unity with the contrabassoon for very long once they are playing together. Yeah, and then on top of that, of course, the contrabassoon is coming in an octave lower as it is. So, so we don't really have so the contrabassoon part is very isolated and it's very audible. This is a little bit better, right? You notice when this is actually in unison with the double basses here, it's much more. It works together better, but then when the rest happens, just like before, and drops out, we also lose the unity, and there's no fading in and out or anything like that, or there's no fade outs at the end to make it sort of slide into the timbre of the strings. But I mean, it's a cool way of to have both harmonic rolls and accompaniment rolls, like the figuration with your lower strings. That is a great idea, Alex. I mean, it's a great way of economic scoring. And yeah, I mean, it just sort of brings to mind a little, you know, I mean, I think that you are definitely scoring in a way that is, it's pretty, it's you are using less resources in an interesting and imaginative way, right? There's nothing about this that really won't work. And I really appreciate that you have, you've taken some time. Sorry about the image having jumped up like that. You've taken some time to work out bowings for your string players, and to not slur over the repeated notes. I mean, it's still sort of pianistic type slurring. Let's face it. But like you don't, you avoid slurring over the repeated notes everywhere, and that's really really appreciated. And yeah, I mean, I mean, do you really want to not articulate on the downbeat here? Or right? I mean, do we? I mean, it is just an accompaniment part, right? It's not the melody, right? Like it's playing around here. These notes are in the range of the viola and the cellos. So it doesn't really matter like whether or not this is slurred. I mean, it just seems like a lot of work to slur down a fifth right here. I mean, it's easy to do for a pro, but I mean, it's just kind of like, I mean, why when the player could just finish finish their breath at the end of this note and then just articulate. It's just easier, and just makes more sense too with the pulse. All right. And same thing here, I would say. And yeah, and this kind of goes on in the same way. And here, I think this is all very reasonable, the build up. But did you notice how the timpani roll in the mock-up really kind of trashed up the sound? And it's because you're using such a low kettle. I think that if you took this up an octave, then you get a much cleaner roll. And then also, if you started at pianissimo, rolled in just to piano or mezzo piano, or even just left it at pianissimo all the way through, then I think you would get the effect that you imagine. Okay. Now, one of the other sort of possibly clunky things about the contrabassoon, the way that you've scored it, is after you do this, there's no more contrabassoon, and then you're substituting that possible clunkiness with the roll, right, which is on this lower pitch. But I feel that roll or not, that the absence of the contrabassoon is becomes part of the conversation of its protuberance into your texture rather than being a smooth element. Recently, just a quick aside. Recently, I had a contrabassoonist play some of my orchestrations, crossover orchestrations, on contraforte, and I was amazed not at the loudness of the contraforte, but at the extreme nuances that were possible from it, just the range of expression. Usually contrabassoon doesn't have that wide of a range, but like just the subtleties. It was amazing. It was like it had all the subtleties that you could get out of a bassoon, and possibly even more. I don't know. And I heard this guy warming up in between times of active rehearsal. And yeah, he played a ton of stuff on it, and it just seemed so fluid and so easy to get a bunch of different notes. And a lot of people sort of complain. They say, "Oh well, the contraforte, it's just really, really loud." This guy has been playing his contraforte for I think 4 to 5 years, and he has, he's able to just get things down to the finest point on his contraforte, just so soft. And then also play really, really loud when it's needed, right? Louder than, is the kind of the kind of weight that people expect from their contrabassoon parts after listening to mock-ups, right? That don't know any difference. Like the mock-up has no idea that contrabassoons cannot play as loud as just the dynamic curve that is assigned by the application's playback. Anyway, so it was just something that I thought of. This is a very cool. See, this I really love. This low tuba note right in here, and just the way that you add a little bit of color here. Ba da da. It's really, really lovely. Yeah, and then kind of going on here, the harmonization in the upper parts, that's also really great. Yeah, and just touches of horn and so on. Yeah, I mean, I think that you could have easily gone on and done a beautiful approach to B and C as well, and yeah, who knows, possibly even D, or maybe you even scored those and you didn't send them to me. I don't know. But I think this was a really great effort, Sasha, and part of our ongoing conversation. And, despite me sort of picking things apart and saying, oh, maybe you could have done a little bit better this or a little bit more of that, or maybe the contrabassoon's a little too loud, or, all of those other things, there isn't really a whole lot about your entry that doesn't work, right? I mean, I think that you could put it on some people's music stands and listen to it, and I think that the audience would like it, Especially the basset horn, people would be going, "Oh man, check that out!" If they could actually see it, it's kind of hard to tell the difference. But there's a little bend of the neck and so on that makes it look a little bit like a saxophone kind of clarinet from a distance. But yeah. Anyhow, yeah. So really cool score. Love it. No strong objections, and actually, like I was just mentioning before, the 2023 orchestration challenge, like you got me really curious about what you would do with that, like whether you would take the approach of the composer who is going to be, who I've chosen, the composer and the piece and the period, or whether you would do something just ultra modernistic with it. The possibilities are endless, and so is the fun. So speaking of which, let's go on, with thanks to Sasha, to our final very, very last score of all of these website evaluations, website subscriber evaluations. Score number 68. The 68th score out of 68 at the end of this 12th collection of website subscriber evaluations. Such cool colors, and and I mean there are a ton of things to fix, but I really love the overall shape of this particular entry and the different things that you did with it. Okay, so just a few basic things in here. do not give your players any bowings, okay? I don't know how these ended up in here. They seem a little random. So, yeah, so look, especially slurring to a tremolo, right? So I guess you sort of want a really connected sense, if that were intentional. And if not, if you kind of didn't know, like there is no way to really make this kind of slur because like the player's bow will start to go up and down really, really quickly when it gets to the C from the D, right? So, I mean, you can make it feel kind of connected to match up with everything else that's going on, but I would say don't even bother. It's just fussy, this kind of thing. And especially if you're starting with an accent, that goes against the entire thing of the slur, right, towards the tremolo, because the accent will just be the beginning of a new direction of the bow as the player just hits it really hard, right? So there's no connection here with the slur. So, I mean, about the best you could do possibly would be to make these maybe tenuto. I think that's actually kind of... But, I mean, then you get into whole questions of note shaping and stuff. So I just say, just forget about it. Don't slur into a tremolo unless you have a real specific purpose in mind that goes beyond what you've got here. And just leave out the up bows and the down bows. The players will figure that out. That's their job, not yours. Okay. So now let's get into the scoring. Okay, so we've got our trumpet on the melody here. Bum 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 bum. We got the first and second horn with trombone doubling the lower note of the horn. Yeah, and then, which is a really nice strategy because then you can use the trombone to, just as you do here, to play those extended notes that give the harmony context, right? So far, you have really obeyed everything that Barvinsky set out, except for like having an octave on top of the trumpet. But you don't really need that. In this kind of a thing, the overtones of the first trumpet do the work of giving us the information of that octave above. But the question becomes like, do you honestly want piano-style phrasing on your brass instruments? Seriously? Did you give serious thought to the consequences of that? Do you really want your melody to go, da, right? So there's no emphasis on the downbeat? Or do you want to go, da, 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 right? And do you want to slur across the downbeat here? Da, or do you want da, da? And here's the kicker. Do you really, really want to slur across a dotted rhythm? When you do this, like there's no definition, right? So this is just taken right from the piano score, right? Which says to me, you might not have been thinking about the consequences, about what happens when you do that, both in oboe here and in trumpet. Do you really want da, da? See, like it almost disappears. And you can hear it in the mock-up too. If you take this away, maybe just have a slur across here. Da, 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 da. Or you could even put in a slur here on this, from this A to this D. Da, da, da. You know what I mean? And you could slur from here to there. Ta, 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 ta. And then you definitely settle on that. And this, this just really seems like a long, long time. Long slur. I mean, sure, a pro trombonist can play it with no problem, but like the amount of finesse and control and everything else you get from shorter slurs in this situation, especially from lower brass, is just is much more functional. Yeah, so, seriously. So, Alex, did you watch my video, 12 Common Scoring Errors? Do you remember that I had a one of those errors was that not to just automatically assume that piano style, the slurs that were the piano phrasing was something you should put on top of your, you should just automatically transcribe into your wind and string parts, right? Because sometimes they're very, very long and they don't make a lot of sense, right? Like this right in here. We don't get the ta-ta-ta. We get da, da, right? So there's no definition on the downbeat. There's no ta-ta, right? In any of these dotted rhythms. We've taken that away, right? Just because it was easier to drop in, right? Or was it? So think about those things, all right? Look, you were doing some beautiful work here. It's too good for you to be doing that without thinking about it, all right? Okay. So, as far as just the orchestration itself goes, without all the other details, it's pretty good. Continuing on here with the horn gives a little bit of context from the previous section, and oboe is certainly a strong enough. It's trading off from oboe to first clarinet, and then adding more winds and so on. And that all works great for communicating the melody. And and once again, the horn's connecting it with what happened before. That's all great. However, what's with the triple P down here? Do you notice how it was like almost completely inaudible? What are those pitches, right? So, thinking about it, we've got C and A, right? Middle C and the A below it. And hey, that's the same two pitches as these horns. So maybe you were thinking, oh, well, I'll add some tension behind the horns. Well, the thing about it is that the horns at piano are like twice as loud already as the violin and viola would be at the same dynamic. So you're basically, the horns here are 4 times as loud. If you flipped these dynamics, what would happen? If your horns went to pianissimo, giving you very beautiful, clear solos right in here that didn't have all those overtones and didn't have such a strong horn presence here. And this just went to piano. We get rid of the slur and get rid of the bowing marks. Then what would happen? Why don't you try it out in your mock-up? I guarantee that the proportions of everything would immediately improve. And then, like, continuing on, this is, I don't have any big problems with this. I think it's very cool to have the oboe and the bassoon working together. And then, like, you just throw in that little F sharp to E kind of thing happening in the, and I think that all works great too. And then everybody just goes down to a pianissimo. Now, let's say that you did make your horns pianissimo here. You could basically just, you could throw in these hairpins or not, and then you could just end pianissimo with everybody else, or even triple P. You could take them down to a very, very fine point if you wanted to, along with the timpani roll. The timpani roll could also be triple P as well, right? And then I think you'd get an incredibly beautiful balance right in here. I mean, this is just so lovely, the flute coming in here on top. Yeah, so nice. All right, so now going on to the second page here. So did you notice that things were a little smooshy right in here? And I'm kind of wondering, I'm just going to check out the mix here. Yeah, see, look how soft the violas are here in the mix, and the cellos, right, and double basses. Yeah, so they basically have been mixed down for some reason. I don't know if that is a default for Sibelius on this. But yeah, I mean, you just really hear like I mean, I just really wish that there, that the default level, at 0 was balanced across the whole orchestra. But I guess that's pie in the sky thinking, I guess. So this is all cool. So here's another example. We saw something similar in Sasha's score just from before, and that was like the melody in octaves above, and then the strings, playing a dual role of not only harmonizing on those thirds, that middle voice thirds, but also participating in the interpretation of the figuration. One possible critique I would say is that like the cellos can keep going here, right? They don't have to just stop dead. I felt that like we lost, like if we've got the momentum continuing here, then it doesn't really have to stop here. I think it's a little fiddly, like to have so many separate slurs. Like you might be thinking, well, I had to stop here because I don't want to slur over a repeated note. You didn't want to slur over a repeated note? Then why did you slur over these repeated notes? But okay. Sorry, I'll get off of that hobby horse. So yeah, but like that doesn't mean that everything has to be so chopped up, right? I mean, could the violas basically just take this in 2 bows? Down bow, up bow? Or maybe down bow and then 2 up bows, up bow here and up bow there, right? I mean, it's actually, that's not big of a deal just to reach over with a bow, especially with an up bow. I'm sort of thinking of my own viola playing days long behind me. Yeah, and then, couldn't this connect and go longer and, just to keep the motion going rather than just sort of stopping dead in the middle of each bar for the cellos. I mean, I could see like you're trading off to this right in here, and that's fine. But like here and there, I just feel like the need for the pattern to continue the way that it does naturally in the left hand of the piano part. These are all cool. The pizzicato and then the longer notes and so on. That's all fun. And then the bassoon kind of helping out, thicken it, and so on. Yeah, and then the little contrasts. Mezzo piano, piano, mezzo forte. Yeah, and then you don't push into the next section from the peak here, right? You let things tail off and then you push again. I would say have everybody tail off in a more unified way and then push together in a unified way rather than this kind of sort of the gradual approach of tailing off and then starting again on the crescendo. All right, so once you bring the clarinets in here, you get some definition to the middle voice more than before, right? So it almost kind of begs the question of, could there have been an instrument to help support the figuration a little bit, right? And you chose not to do that, but if you've got bassoon, you really kept your orchestra way down. So I mean, you got a bassoonist who's kind of not doing anything at first. Yeah. Right. Okay. And then right in here, we got second flute playing a bit low, but it's not fatal. It's just kind of close to the clarinets, and what happened to the mezzo forte right in here? I guess that was probably an oversight. But I mean, if you're going to be doubling these pitches anyway in second violins and pushing up to a mezzo forte, the instrument for you is your oboe player. You'll get a nice, beautiful, warm sound. Whereas the second flute is really not going to contribute a whole lot until you get to the D, and then when you go back down to A and G and so on, right? It's pretty much going to go away. So I think that you're better off bringing in your second flute right here, Okay, and then turning this lower line into an oboe part. Because it just, aside from this D, it really isn't contributing a whole lot to your sound picture. Yeah. But I mean, yeah. So just like I would say, watch out for mixer levels. Like if you're having a hard time hearing your middle strings, it could just be because of this. Like, they have been mixed down for some reason, whether that's in the template or whether it's in or the templates that Sibelius generates or not. Hopefully it wasn't in my template. That might have been something that I didn't catch. I'll have to go back and check. But yeah, I mean, a really cool entry and a great way to bring everything to an end. So, since this is the very, very last entry of the website subscribers, and there's plenty more to come from the Patreon crowd. At least another 20, 25 or so entries coming. I will just say thank you to all you subscribers, and once again, apologies. I have not sent out a newsletter. I would like to send out one before the end of the year, announcing a few things, but I mean, I'm just so hammered with work and with stuff right now. Might have to wait until January. All right. So yeah. So thank you so much, everybody, for jumping in with comments and for supporting each other. Like it means more to me than a thank you. If you thank each other and you give each other tips and support and thoughts and feedback and ways to improve and appreciation for the things that you've done. That just really means a huge amount to me. Makes me really, really happy. And I'm so glad that so many people jumped in. I feel that like this year, a lot of people supported on Patreon who normally support like with the just as being part of like the website subscription to the newsletter. Like I think last year it was 90 website subscriber entries, and this year it was 68. But we had way more full-length Patreon entries. So, and that just means more support for those musicians who we were helping out. But, one way or another, you are bringing this music to light, and that deserves a huge amount of appreciation from me and putting so much work into it. I think that Vasil Barvinsky would be incredibly happy with all of the entries that have come out of this, scoring his work and the interest in his music and appreciation for his role and just how that reflects what's going on today. So thank you for that. On his behalf, I don't know if I'm qualified to say that, but just speaking for me as an orchestration instructor and coach and professional orchestrator myself, I really appreciate all of the energy you gave back and all of the entries that you sent, and everybody out there, even if you did not get a chance to participate this year, your help and your interest and your awesome support of the entire process. I really, really am grateful for that. Alrighty, so look for another week and a half of massive doses of those full-length Patreon entries, and I will be seeing you soon with some videos of more great entries.